Nobody expected Karine Jean-Pierre, the White House press secretary, to completely freeze on live TV. She had handled tough questions before, dodging, deflecting, and controlling the narrative with ease. But this time, she had no escape. Because sitting in that press room was Karoline Leavitt, a sharp, fearless conservative who wasn't about to let another scripted, rehearsed answer slide. What started as just another press briefing quickly turned into a complete disaster for Karine. Karoline asked one simple question, and within seconds the entire room went silent. Karine's usual confidence? Gone. Her quick-witted comebacks? Nowhere to be found. And when the cameras zoomed in, her expression said it all. She had nothing, no spin, no excuse, no response. The press watched in stunned silence. The internet erupted. And within minutes, the moment had gone viral. So what exactly happened? And how did Karoline Leavitt completely shut down the White House's top spokesperson on live television? Let's break it down moment by moment. The White House press room was packed. Journalists filled the seats, cameras were rolling, and reporters were ready for another carefully controlled briefing. At the podium stood Karine Jean-Pierre, the Biden administration's press secretary. She had done this 100 times before. Her job? Control the narrative, dodge tough questions, deflect any criticism. And most of the time it worked. She had a playbook, rehearsed responses, vague statements, and a press corps that rarely pushed back. But today was different, because among the reporters in the room sat Karoline Leavitt, a rising conservative powerhouse who wasn't there to play along. Unlike the usual White House reporters, Karoline wasn't going to accept a dodged question. She wasn't going to let Karine escape with scripted talking points. And the moment Karine called on her, everything changed. Karoline leaned forward, locked eyes with Karine, and asked a question that cut straight through the noise. The press room, usually filled with the sound of scribbling reporters and murmured side conversations, suddenly fell silent. Karine blinked. She hesitated. For the first time, she didn't have an immediate answer. The tension in the room was thick because for once Karine Jean-Pierre wasn't in control. And what happened next? It would leave her completely humiliated in front of the entire nation. The moment Karine Jean-Pierre called on Karoline Leavitt, she had no idea she was about to walk straight into a trap. Karoline didn't hesitate. She leaned forward, microphone in hand, her voice calm but firm. "Madam Press Secretary, you've repeatedly claimed that this administration values transparency. But if that's true, why does the White House continue to dodge questions about insert controversy?" The room went silent. All eyes were on Karine. This wasn't the kind of softball question she was used to. She shuffled her notes, glancing down, buying time. Then she gave her go-to move, a vague, rehearsed response. "Well, Karoline, I think it's important that we focus on the facts. This administration has always prioritized truth and integrity, and so then why did the White House insert contradiction?" Karoline interjected, her tone sharp but measured. Boom. Just like that, Karine was back on defense. A flicker of frustration flashed across her face. She tried again. "Look, I think we have to be careful about misinformation, and I want to be very clear." "Clear? Then why are you dodging the question?" Another pause. The press room murmured. Some reporters shifted in their seats. Because they all saw it now, Karine was struggling. She opened her mouth, ready to deflect again. But no words came out. For the first time, Karine Jean-Pierre was completely stuck. And Karoline? She wasn't backing down. She waited, watching, letting the silence stretch. And in that moment, everyone knew what was happening. Karine had no answer. And what happened next? It would change everything. The silence was unbearable. Karine Jean-Pierre shifted uncomfortably, her usual confidence cracking under the weight of the question. She had dodged, she had deflected, but Karoline wasn't letting her off the hook. The press room, once filled with the hum of side conversations and clicking keyboards, was now dead quiet. Every journalist in the room was watching, waiting. And Karoline? She saw the hesitation. She saw the weakness. And she went in for the kill. "So let me ask again," Karoline said, her voice measured but firm. "If this administration values transparency, why does the White House continue to dodge this question?" The pressure was now palpable. Karine forced a smile, but it was tight, strained, the kind that screamed she was out of moves. She let out a nervous chuckle. Well, Karoline, I think we need to be careful with how we frame these discussions. It's important that we don't spread misinformation or mischaracterize the facts. Mischaracterize? Karoline shot back, raising an eyebrow. Are you saying my question is misinformation? Because I'm just asking about your own administration's statements. Boom. The trap snapped shut. Karine froze. Her eyes flicked to the other reporters as if searching for an escape. But there wasn't one. The murmurs in the room grew louder. Even some of the usually sympathetic journalists were leaning in, intrigued. Because they all saw it now, Karoline had completely flipped the power dynamic. Karine wasn't in control anymore. And the White House press secretary? She was about to be completely humiliated on live TV. What happened next would be the breaking point. For a split second, nobody moved. Karine Jean-Pierre sat frozen, her forced smile fading as she realized she had nowhere left to go. The usual press room safety net was gone. No scripted talking points, no friendly reporters jumping in to change the subject. Just silence and everyone watching. Karoline Leavitt, still calm and collected, didn't say a word. She just waited. The tension in the room was unbearable. Karine fidgeted, flipping through her notes as if an answer might magically appear. But there was nothing. She tried to speak, but stopped. She glanced around, but no one was coming to her rescue. Her face said it all. She had no response. One of the reporters in the back coughed. The murmurs in the room grew louder. Even some of the journalists who were usually on Karine's side were now looking at each other, realizing what had just happened. The White House press secretary, the person whose job is to control the narrative, had just been completely shut down in front of the entire country. Karoline, she never broke eye contact. She simply tilted her head slightly as if to say, "Are you done?" Karine swallowed hard, her face tight with frustration, before finally muttering something barely coherent about needing to move on to the next question. But it was already too late. The moment had been captured. And before the White House could even try to do damage control, the internet exploded. Before Karine Jean-Pierre could even recover, the damage was already done. Because in the age of the internet, humiliation spreads like wildfire. And this was the moment everyone was talking about. Within minutes, clips of Karine's stunned silence flooded Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok. Twitter was on fire with hashtags like #KarineExposed, #NoResponse, and #CarolineWins trending within the hour. YouTube was flooded with reaction videos, political breakdowns, and side-by-side replays of Karine's meltdown. TikTok creators were already remixing the moment into viral edits, zooming in on Karine's panicked expression and adding dramatic music. The comment sections were brutal. Wait, isn't her job to answer questions and she just froze on national TV? This might be the most embarrassing moment in White House press briefing history. I thought Karine was supposed to be the spokesperson, but she had nothing. Karoline just destroyed her. And the memes absolutely ruthless. A still shot of Karine's blank expression captioned, "When your talking points don't cover the actual question." A gif of her flipping through her notes in panic, Karine looking for the answer that doesn't exist. A side-by-side image of Karine mocking conservatives for dodging tough questions, next to a clip of her own meltdown. Ironic, isn't it? But the real sign of a complete disaster? The way the mainstream media reacted. CNN rushed to call it a contentious exchange, downplaying the moment as much as possible. MSNBC claimed Karine was taking a stand against right-wing misinformation. The Washington Post even ran an op-ed blaming Karoline, saying her question was designed to trap Karine. But it didn't matter, because every time they tried to spin the moment, people just went back and rewatched the clip. The raw, unedited footage didn't lie. Everyone had seen it with their own eyes. Karine Jean-Pierre froze, and Karoline Leavitt, she exposed her. And what happened next? It only got worse for Karine. The meltdown was too big to ignore, so the media did what they always do. They went into full damage control mode. CNN was one of the first to respond, rushing out a segment where their anchors downplayed the moment, calling it a contentious exchange, and claiming that Karine Jean-Pierre had been taken out of context. They cut up the footage, edited out the long, awkward silence, and instead framed it as a back-and-forth debate where Karine was simply pushing back against misinformation. MSNBC took it even further. They completely ignored the viral moment, instead running a headline that read, "Karine Jean-Pierre takes a stand against right-wing disinformation," pretending that her silence was actually a deliberate move rather than an embarrassing failure to answer a question. The Washington Post went with a different approach. Instead of defending Karine, they attacked Karoline. They ran an op-ed blaming Karoline Leavitt, arguing that her question was nothing more than a political trap, designed to corner the press secretary with dishonest, bad faith framing. But here's the problem. The footage was already out there. Millions had already seen it, shared it, and commented on it. And no matter how hard the media tried to spin the moment, it only made things worse. Every time an outlet tried to rewrite history, people just reposted the clip. Raw, unedited, unspinnable, because the truth was right there for everyone to see. Karine Jean-Pierre wasn't standing up to misinformation. She wasn't calling out bad faith attacks. She was completely unprepared. She froze. She had no answer. And that was exactly why the moment exploded online. People didn't need a political analyst to tell them what happened. They could see it for themselves. The White House press secretary, the official mouthpiece of the Biden administration, had just collapsed under pressure on live TV. And Karoline Leavitt, she didn't even need to argue. She just let Karine expose herself. That's what made this moment so powerful. The media could try to cover it up. They could try to edit out the worst parts. They could try to reframe the moment as something it wasn't. But it was too late. The world had already seen what happened. And Karoline, she was about to fire back. The media had done everything in their power to cover up Karine Jean-Pierre's meltdown. They edited the footage, cutting out the long, awkward silence. They ran headlines spinning the story, pretending that Karine had been the one in control. They flooded the airwaves with damage control interviews, trying to shift the focus onto anything but the truth. But none of it worked, because while they scrambled to rewrite the narrative, Karoline Leavitt was one step ahead. She didn't need corporate media spin doctors or a PR crisis team. She just fired off a single tweet, a 6-second clip of Karine stuttering, flipping through her notes, and finally going silent, accompanied by 4 devastating words. "I thought this was a debate?" Boom. The tweet exploded. Millions of views in hours, hundreds of thousands of likes, retweets, and comments. News anchors quoting it live on air. Because Karoline didn't have to insult Karine. She didn't have to call her weak or humiliate her further. She just let the moment speak for itself. And that's what made it even worse for the White House. Because now, every time someone tried to defend Karine, someone else just posted the tweet. Every time a journalist tried to downplay the moment, people just replayed the clip. Every time the White House tried to pretend it didn't happen, the internet just made it trend again. The backlash wasn't just from conservatives. Even mainstream journalists, who usually gave Karine a pass, had to admit that this was a disaster. A New York Times columnist wrote, "Regardless of where you stand politically, it was clear that Karine Jean-Pierre was unprepared for that moment. And in the world of modern media, those moments define you." A former CNN anchor tweeted, "As someone who's been in this business for decades, I can tell you, this was not just a bad answer. This was a career-defining moment, and not in a good way." Even some Democrat strategists were forced to acknowledge reality. One anonymous insider told Politico, "Look, Karine's a nice person, but when you take that podium, you have to be ready for anything. If you freeze like that, you're giving the opposition exactly what they want. And Karoline Leavitt just turned this into a viral sensation." The meme storm was relentless. A still shot of Karine's blank expression captioned, "When your talking points don't cover the actual question." A looping gif of Karine flipping through her notes with the caption, "Loading, still loading, error 404, response not found." A side-by-side image of Karine mocking conservatives for dodging tough questions, next to a clip of her own meltdown. Ironic, isn't it? And it wasn't just political commentators. Even comedians and late-night hosts, who usually defended the Biden administration, couldn't resist making fun of the disaster. Jimmy Fallon played the clip on his show, shaking his head. "I haven't seen someone crash and burn this badly since my last attempt at parallel parking." Bill Maher, who had spent years defending Democrats, couldn't hold back. "This administration is all about transparency. Just look at how clearly Karine stared into the void when she had no answer." Even Saturday Night Live, which rarely mocks Democrats, did a cold open skit of Karine's meltdown, complete with a fake press secretary flipping through blank note cards before slowly backing away from the podium in silence. It was official. The moment had become bigger than just a political debate. It was a pop culture moment. It had entered the mainstream. And at that point, there was nothing the White House could do to stop it. But behind closed doors, they were scrambling. Karine Jean-Pierre had just been humiliated on a global stage. And Karoline Leavitt? She had gone from being just another conservative voice to the woman who completely dismantled the Biden administration's top spokesperson on live television. The fallout, it was just beginning. The damage was done. Karine Jean-Pierre wasn't just embarrassed. She wasn't just trending for the wrong reasons. She had suffered something far worse. She had lost credibility. And in politics, once that's gone, you don't get it back. By the next morning, her failure was everywhere. The clip of her freezing up had been watched millions of times across social media. Major news outlets, even the ones that usually defended her, were forced to cover it. Even on the most left-leaning networks, panelists were struggling to spin the disaster. At MSNBC, a host uncomfortably admitted, "Look, I support the administration, but yeah, this was a rough moment for Karine. There's no denying that." CNN brought in a media strategist who tried to downplay the situation. Press secretaries have tough days. This was just one of those moments where she didn't have the best response. But the audience wasn't buying it. The comment sections on these segments were brutal. This wasn't a tough day, this was a meltdown. She had no idea what to say. Imagine if this had been a Republican press secretary. The media would be destroying them right now. You can spin it all you want. This was a total disaster for the White House. It didn't take long for even some Democrats to start questioning Karine's future. A former Obama administration staffer went on a podcast and said, "Look, being press secretary is a tough job. You have to be quick, sharp, and ready for anything. When you're standing at that podium, you represent the entire administration. And if you choke like that, you're making the whole White House look weak." Then came the leaks. Anonymous sources from inside the White House started talking to reporters, revealing just how bad things had gotten behind closed doors. According to Politico, senior officials were furious about how the situation had spiraled out of control. "Nobody is happy about this. Karine should have been better prepared. Now we're stuck dealing with this media storm." Another report from Axios claimed that some inside the administration were already discussing a replacement. This wasn't just one bad briefing. This was a moment that hurt the entire White House's messaging strategy. And there are real conversations happening about what comes next. Even top Democrats were distancing themselves from Karine. When reporters asked high-ranking officials to comment on the viral clip, most of them refused to answer directly. The message was clear. Karine Jean-Pierre was on her own. And it wasn't just in Washington. Even in liberal media circles, Karine had become a liability. A New York Times columnist wrote an unusually blunt opinion piece. Regardless of where you stand politically, it was clear that Karine Jean-Pierre was unprepared for that moment. And in the world of modern media, those moments define you. A longtime Democratic strategist told The Atlantic, "We're at a point where every single thing that happens in a White House briefing can go viral in minutes. You don't get a do-over. The White House should be very concerned about how this is playing out." And then there was the polling data. An overnight Snap poll found that nearly 60% of Americans who saw the clip thought Karine was unprepared and not up to the job. Among independents, the people the White House needed to win over the most, the numbers were even worse. Nearly 70% agreed that the moment damaged the credibility of the administration. One commentator on a Sunday morning panel summed it up perfectly. "This isn't just about one bad briefing. This is about the White House looking weak, and right now they look weaker than ever." Meanwhile, Karoline Leavitt was thriving. Her social media following exploded. Conservative media outlets were lining up interviews, eager to hear her break down the moment in her own words. But Karoline, she wasn't over-explaining, she wasn't gloating. She was doing what she had done since the very beginning. She was letting the truth speak for itself. Instead of posting a long statement, she retweeted another clip of Karine fumbling through her notes, adding just one word: "Ouch." That single tweet went viral all over again. Because at this point, Karine's failure wasn't just a moment. It had become a defining moment. The question wasn't whether she had a bad day. The question was whether she would ever recover. And as the days passed, one thing became more and more obvious. She probably wouldn't. The White House was now in full damage control mode. Multiple sources inside the administration revealed that Biden's team was furious about how the situation had spiraled out of control. A White House insider told a reporter from Axios, "There's frustration at the highest levels. The president expects his press secretary to be prepared for anything, and that wasn't what we saw." Another source, speaking anonymously to Politico, put it even more bluntly, "Nobody wants to say it out loud, but there are real conversations happening about whether she's still the right person for this job." For now, Karine remained in her position. But the damage was done, and in Washington, once people start questioning whether you should still have your job, it's usually only a matter of time before you don't. As the fallout continued, Karoline Leavitt had gone from just another conservative voice to the woman who completely dismantled the Biden administration's top spokesperson on live television. And for Karine Jean-Pierre, the nightmare was far from over. After everything, the meltdown, the viral storm, the media spin, the White House scrambling, one question still remained. A question that no amount of damage control could erase. A question that kept popping up in comment sections, news panels, and political discussions across the country. Why did Karine Jean-Pierre have no response? Why did the official spokesperson for the President of the United States, someone who is supposed to be the most prepared person in the room, completely freeze in front of the entire world? It wasn't a hard question. It wasn't a gotcha moment. It wasn't something she couldn't have seen coming. And yet, she had nothing. No defense, no talking points, no attempt to even spin the question in her favor. Just awkward silence, a nervous shuffle of papers, and a desperate search for an escape. For many Americans, this wasn't just about Karine. It was about what her silence represented. Because this wasn't just a press secretary struggling to answer a tough question. This was the face of the Biden administration crumbling under the slightest bit of pressure. And if she couldn't even handle Karoline Leavitt's pushback, then what did that say about the entire administration? A Republican strategist on Fox News summed it up perfectly. This isn't just about Karine Jean-Pierre looking bad. This is about what happens when an administration is built on nothing but talking points and media spin. The second someone actually challenges them, they fall apart. Even some liberal analysts couldn't deny the deeper issue. A Democratic consultant, speaking anonymously to The Atlantic, admitted, "This moment is going to stick." It reinforced the worst perception people have about the White House, that they're all about messaging but don't actually have any real answers. Because that was the real problem. This wasn't a one-time fluke. It wasn't just a bad day. It was a symptom of something bigger. For years, this administration had relied on controlled messaging, friendly media, and pre-screened questions. But the second someone stepped outside that bubble and asked something real, it all fell apart, and that's why the moment refused to die. Because every time someone replayed that clip, it reminded people of the larger truth. That the White House wasn't as strong as they pretended to be. That their press secretary wasn't prepared for real pushback. That their entire messaging strategy was built on shaky ground. And in a world where optics matter more than ever, that kind of exposure is impossible to recover from. For Karine Jean-Pierre, the immediate damage was obvious. Her credibility was shattered. Her future as press secretary was in serious doubt, and every future press briefing would now come with the added pressure of proving that she wasn't going to collapse again. But for the Biden administration, the damage ran much deeper. Because Karoline Leavitt didn't just expose Karine Jean-Pierre, she exposed the entire system that protected her. She exposed the media's desperate spin attempts. She exposed the White House's inability to handle real scrutiny. She exposed the fragility of an administration that only knows how to control the narrative but can't defend it when challenged. And that's what made this moment so much bigger than just one bad press briefing. This was a turning point. The moment people started asking, if Karine Jean-Pierre had no response, does that mean there wasn't one? Because at the end of the day, if the truth was on their side, shouldn't she have been able to answer? And when that question lingers in people's minds, it doesn't just go away. It stays, it spreads, and it changes the way people see everything that happens next. That's why this wasn't just a single embarrassing moment. It was the moment that defined an entire administration's weakness. And no matter how much the White House, the media, or Karine herself tried to bury it, the internet never forgets, and neither would the American people. The aftershocks of this moment were already rippling through Washington, and the consequences were beginning to take shape. Political analysts started speculating on Karine's future. Would she be replaced quietly in the coming months? Would the White House double down and keep her, hoping the controversy fades, or would Karine herself step down, knowing her credibility had been permanently damaged? Already there were rumors swirling that White House officials were meeting behind closed doors, weighing their options. A source from within the administration told Politico, "Nobody is saying it out loud yet, but you can feel it. This was bad. Really bad. There's no coming back from something like this." But perhaps the biggest sign that this moment had permanently altered Karine's standing? Her next press briefing. When she walked up to the podium, the energy in the room was different. Reporters who once gave her softballs now watched her carefully. Even the usually friendly journalists were hesitant, unsure, because everyone knew Karine Jean-Pierre had been exposed. And now, every time she opened her mouth, there was an unspoken doubt hanging over her, a lingering question. A question that would follow her in every future briefing, every interview, every appearance. A question she couldn't escape. A question that no carefully crafted talking point could erase. Why did she have no response? Because maybe there wasn't one. And if there truly wasn't one, then what did that mean about everything else this administration had been saying? For Karine Jean-Pierre, this was a career-defining moment. For the Biden administration, this was a wake-up call they never saw coming. And for Karoline Leavitt, this was only the beginning. Because one moment of silence had just spoken louder than anything else in politics. And now, everyone was listening.